Tim Amyx here. It is October 2020, and 13 years ago our family took our 2007 road trip. Today I am going to present to you what I call the director's cut, looking back 13 years ago, some of the outtakes with me describing some of the action, some of the behind the scenes, some of the little stories that you didn't see in the edited version. And who is our family? Our family is me, Tim Amyx. 13 years ago, I was give or take 48 years old. Florencia, the mom of the family, you're going to see, she was early 40-something. Nicole was 13 years old and finishing the 7th grade. Isabella was 10 years old and she had just finished the 4th grade. So that's our family 13 years ago. Let's take a look at the map and the route of what our road trip was. And our road trip began right here, where all of our road trips begin, in our home in Mill Valley, California. We crossed up to the center of California, went up to Lake Tahoe and spent some time in Serene Lakes, then went up the center of California to Mount Shasta, crossed over the Oregon border into Crater Lake National Park, then on up over to Bend. Bend we went up to Portland and the Columbia River Gorge, crossed the Washington border, went to Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens was followed by Mount Rainier, and Mount Rainier took us over to Olympic National Park in the far northwest section of the United States. We crossed the Puget Sound, went up to Vancouver, and Vancouver is just the southern end of Canada. Crossed the border from Canada over to little Canadian towns of Osiosus, Nelson, some smaller lakes, came down into Idaho, the panhandle of Idaho, just a little bit, then crossed over into Montana, where one of our main destinations of the trip was Glacier National Park. After spending a few days in Glacier National Park, came down along the Flathead area, along a lake, I can't remember the name of that lake, down to Missoula, Montana, crossed over the Continental Divide, came down Highway 93 of Idaho into the S-towns Sula, Stanley, Salmon, and then Sun Valley, Idaho, where we spent a few days with our Tamalpa friends. After that, came back across the border into Wells, Nevada, came across Nevada, Winnemucca, Reno, crossed the Sierra Nevadas, Truckee, and back to Sacramento and Mill Valley, home sweet home, home at last. Let's have Isabella talk a little bit about how we started the road trip and what we did.
We went to Lake Tahoe and my mom ran the 100-mile race to Western States.
So yes, our first stop on the 2007 road trip after Florencia ran the Western States race was up at Squaw Valley. This is not the first time we did this with the girls, and it wasn't the last time. You can see Mom and Jim, the Grandma Marietta and Grandpa Jim, were with us because they were helping Florencia as aid people, as crew people for the Western States 100-mile run. So they joined us at a day up at Squaw Valley where we stopped and had lunch and took the tram up to the top and went ice skating. Ice skating is another thing we've done a few times. I had a high school friend named Charlie Thurston who worked at Squaw Valley, and he got us passes to go skiing, and I want to say he got us passes to go skating, but I'm not 100% sure. Here's Nicole and Isabella, and they love to tell me, "Dad, film me so we can do our spins." And they would skate backwards and practice doing their spins. Also wanted to point out, you probably saw Isabella with her braces, and keep that in mind because her braces, there they are, look at those cute little braces, those do become an issue later on in the road trip. On the way down from the ice skating ring, we took the tram, and you can see how the tram wobbles coming down towards Squaw Valley. In the distance, you can see our Eurovan. This we purchased in 2006. It's a 1992 Eurovan. We purchased it from a fella in Sebastopol for $7,500. And that was our road trip vehicle for the next 9 years. And stopping for ice cream is something we used to always do with Grandma and Grandpa. This is at the base of the Squaw Valley Lodge. We stayed at Serene Lakes. This here is Three Rock Cabin. It's a ski cabin owned by Mitch and Becky DeShields, friends of ours from Tamalpa. We went there numerous times, not only on road trips, but a couple of times with other friends, and other times when we used to go skiing as well. First stop was Shasta City KOA Campground, and let's have Nicole talk about where we were and what we were doing.
We are unloading the camper van on our first stop. Okay, I look really bad right now, but in KOA Campground in Shasta City.
So the KOA campground in Shasta City was typical in terms of KOA campgrounds. They always had a miniature golf, Wi-Fi, and a swimming pool, and the girls used to love that. Look there at the top of the camper. You can't quite see it. At the front, I used to put a couple of poles. They would prop up the top because there was so much weight on the top with that rocket box that I was concerned that the bed might come down on the girls at night. So I strapped that down with a couple of big poles. Something we used to always enjoy doing as we were traveling is we would pull out a map and we would plan the next day's trip. Here's Nicole talking about how we're going to Crater Lake.
And we're going to take a lot of pictures?
While we were at this KOA campground in Shasta City, we took a bike ride around town, and on the way to the downtown area, we stopped as one of the longest trains we ever saw came by.
No! There's a train coming!
There's a joke that we have these days when we're on road trips. Whenever I see a train, me, Tim, Dad will say, "Squirrel! Squirrel!" as though I were a dog, and that's my favorite thing I see when we're out on road trips. Isabella was counting here, and there must have been, I think, 80 or 90 train cars on this one. That's a long train. Oh, here's the end, I think. Isabella's counting all the cars. And the final car goes by. That was a long train. A ver, ¿cuántos?
61.
And after the train went by, we hopped on our bikes and rode through the downtown of Shasta City. On the way north, we crossed the border heading into Oregon, and we stopped here for our semi-usual family portrait. After crossing the border north a bit, we stopped for lunch at a salad sandwich place called Blimpie's. Entering Crater Lake National Park, one of our big destinations for this trip. Crater Lake was established in 1902. It's the fourth of 62 national parks, of which we've been to 35 of them by now. Take a look at this reveal shot. This is what I call the wow factor. Wow. Wow. This is something that Florencia has asked me about, and I've asked her when we're going to talk about our favorite national parks. And I always ask her, well, what's the wow factor? If you see something like the Tetons or the Grand Canyon and this Crater Lake, how much of it is a wow? Well, this is one of my favorite wow moments when I first went to Crater Lake. The first time we went there was 2005. And here we are for our second trip in 2007. And we went one time, I think 2 or 3 years after that. Here we are enjoying a nice afternoon overlooking the lake from the lodge. As we leave Crater Lake, we drive through this tree tunnel. Can't remember the name of this highway, the Winnemea National Forest. We're on our way here to Bend, Oregon, and as usual, the girls are in the back seat watching their movie. I think I told you once before on one of our road trips that Florencia usually limits the girl to one movie a day. Unless it's a long drive, then they might get 2 movies a day. The rest of the time she wants them doing homework or reading. Now here we are at Bend, Oregon, the middle of the state. Population is 97,000, and it's known for having the Deschutes River, which flows through the middle. It's a great bike and boating and skiing town in the winter. In the background, as the bikes cross the river, you can see the old mill district. The 2 smokestacks remind me of Morro Bay. Since this trip, we've been back to Bend, I'd say at least 2 or 3 other times. On this shot, I enjoyed setting up a time lapse. Told the girls to drive through this tunnel. This is, again, not far from the Old Mill District in Bend, Oregon. Now, Tim, get out the camera and take the camera off. And here's Nicole talking about a few of the favorite things we did in Oregon, in and around Bend.
Oregon, it's like a nice little town, sort of like Sun Valley or Mill Valley. It was a really nice town. We went on a bike ride around there to explore the outsides of the town. And we walked in the town, walking into shops and stuff and walking around. And I really liked the campground there that we slept at. It was called Tumalo Campground. And there was a lot of kids, and it was just like a really nice campground. And there was like swings right by where our tent was. And it was kind of just like a nice setting and a good environment that I felt like.
One of our special treats the night of leaving Bend and the next morning was waking up after having camped in Ainsworth State Park, which is along the Columbia River Gorge. During the night, numerous trains passed through, and I had no idea how close they were to the campground until the next day. And the next morning we woke up and went for this deliciously fun bike ride, discovering how close we were to the Columbia River Gorge and the Columbia River and the train tracks. On the way to Portland the next day, after packing up at Ainsworth State Park, we headed west on the Columbia River Gorge Highway and saw lots of waterfalls. One of the most spectacular is the well-photographed Multnomah Falls. The Multnomah Falls are 620 feet high, and they're crossed by the often photographed Benson Bridge. Looking down from the bridge, you can see how close the train tracks are to the falls, which are divided by the old Columbia River Gorge Highway, which, by the way, is a really cool highway. And the modern-day freeway is on the other side of the train tracks. That's Interstate 84, which runs from Portland on into Idaho. A few miles west of Multnomah Falls is a stop called the Vista House. This Vista House was originally built in 1918 and was remodeled in 2000. It was originally built as an observatory for the flow of the Columbia River, which you can see in the background sits about 733 feet below the ridge. And this, of course, is where Lewis and Clark came through in 1805. Through our travels, we have many favorite cities. We probably have a dozen cities that we say, oh, that's one of my favorite cities. Now here we are in Portland, Oregon, another one of our favorite cities. Portland, the city itself, has about 600,000 in the city limits, and the greater area has about 2.5 million. We rode the train and the trolley car through downtown. There's the famous Powell's bookstore, which we went into. And there's the old downtown train station. Walked through that as well. Isabella is going to cross the train tracks here, and this sets up a story that Nicole and she are going to tell you about.
I really remember when my dad's like, why don't you put down a coin and see what happens? Actually, that's what I said. The guy started yelling at her. They give out tickets for that. And so my mom was like saying, come back. And the guy was yelling at her, and she was like not knowing what to do. And there was two of the little train things coming from both directions, and it was pretty scary.
This bus guy like honked at me, and I got really scared.
It was a trolley.
Oh, it was a trolley, and it honked at me.
As we leave Portland, we cross this bridge. Don't know what the name of it is, but we do go over the Willamette River, which is one of the other big rivers which meets the Columbia right in downtown Portland. Next stop, a couple hours north of Portland, as we're into the state of Washington, is Mount St. Helens. Sadly, this day was a bit of a letdown because the entire top of the volcano, you can see, is covered by what? A big cloud. So this massive volcano that erupted in May 18th, 1980, where 57 people were killed, 250 homes were destroyed, as well as 47 bridges in the valley below. We did not get to see the top of this volcano, but there was a real nice visitor center, and there was also a terrific ranger that gave a talk and explanation about the day that it exploded in May of 1980, and she also recalled how she was a young girl at the time living in the area.
By the Forest Service, what they did was they set up a makeshift monitoring system in the basement of the Forest Service headquarters, which is down in Vancouver, Washington.
So
Now, let's listen to some of Nicole's observations about the stop at Mount St. Helens.
I've been hearing so much about it since like third grade, and I've been really interested in it. And finally, we got to go see it and learned the whole story. And now I feel like I'm an expert. We saw 2 movies on it of how it erupted and how it like blew up basically, and half of the mountain flew off. And now it's like this big like crater with a mini volcano growing inside. It was cloudy that day, but it was still really interesting to know the story. It's a really incredible story of how big the eruption was, and it can be heard from like Redding, California, and the ash went through many cities. So it was a really interesting story, and I liked going to this site where it was all the lava that had flowed through the whole valley, and seeing all it. It was really incredible.
Driving north of Mount St. Helens, an hour or two, we came to Mount Rainier National Park. And the first thing I did was I had the girls drive the car in while I waited outside and filmed a shot of the car exiting the park, even though we were actually entering the park. That night we stayed at the campground called the Cougar Rock Campground, which is probably about an hour or two south of the visitor center. The next day we hopped in the car and we headed towards the visitor center. Stopping along the way were bridges, creeks, and more than a few glaciers. That in the distance, believe it or not, is a glacier coming down from the top of Mount St. Helens. No, Mount Rainier, sorry. Now here we are in the visitor center, which at the time I think was being remodeled. Again, this is 2007, and they were remodeling the Mount Rainier Visitor Center. Set up this shot. Setting up the camera, Tim. Okay, everybody hold, and action. Walk through the camera. Can't tell you how many times I did this. The girls, believe it or not, have gotten pretty patient with me setting up these walkthroughs. There's the visitor center in the background, and we opened up our camper, pulled out the bread and the knives, and Florencia made us a delicious lunch. Can't remember what it was. Can you see on the top of that? Kettle chips. Oh, this was the day that Isabella enjoyed drinking my Coke. We're sharing that. And of course, what would a road trip be without stopping to go on a train ride? The Mount Rainier Scenic Railway. This headed out of the town of Elby, Washington, and you loaded into the car and it went south for about an hour, and it stopped a couple of times. I can't remember what exactly it did when it stopped, but when we got to the very end, it turned around. No, it didn't turn around. It went back the other way. So it pulled you out one way and then pushed you back the other way. There was a singing cowboy on the train, and I remember the first thing he said was, "Does anybody know any railroad songs?" Can't remember what the people answered. But he sang most of the way out, and on the way back, he kind of just sat and talked with people. Here's Isabella going through a nice walkthrough in the train. You were able to walk from car to car. As she walked to the very end, you can see we're actually going backwards now, so we're heading back towards the Elby town. For some reason, when we got about halfway back, you can see coming up here, the train stopped, and we waited for an engine to come connect us. There's Isabella with her cute little braces, clowning around in a selfie, hogging the screen time. Here we go. And now Florencia gets in on the action. Hold on, here we go. Where's Nicole? Nicole! So here we are about halfway back, and for some reason, the train stopped, and another locomotive pulled into the back of us, and it slowly connected and went clunk, 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 and it then pulled us back the rest of the way. The train that was on the other side did not do any more pushing, and now we had this old Heisler locomotive pulling us back to Elby. The cost of this train ride, as I recall, was about $40. Another one of the big stops on this road trip was Seattle, Washington. Here we are approaching the distance. You can see the stadium where the Seahawks play, and also the Space Needle in the background. When one is in Seattle, you do what you do when you're the same thing when you're in San Francisco. You go to the Fisherman's Wharf. Well, in Seattle, it's called the Pikes Peak Market. We walked through here, and I do recall the girls holding their nose because of the smell of fish almost the entire time. To this day, Nicole and Isabella hate the smell of fish. In the evening, we went to the movie theater, also in downtown Seattle, which was probably not far from our, it was about a 20-minute walk from our hotel, and we went and saw Ratatouille. Isabella gave it thumbs up. Ratatouille. It was a lot of fun. I can't remember the name of our hotel, but it was about a 10-minute walk from the Space Needle, and as I mentioned, also about a 20-minute walk from the movie theater downtown. We relaxed that evening and watched television and got caught up on our notes for the next day's trip. The next day we walked over to the Space Needle. This was the area where the World's Fair was in 1963 or 62. One of the few things that is left from the World's Fair is the Space Needle and the monorail. We hopped on the monorail and rode it to downtown and back. Below the Space Needle, they have some amusement park rides. The girls got in this log ride and went up and came down, what does it say, Wild River. They enjoyed that one. And also, they had bumper cars, not far from the log ride. Whenever I see bumper cars, I can't help but think of that scene from Annie Hall where Woody Allen, towards the end of the movie, backs into a police car, and it cuts back and forth between his memory of him growing up in Coney Island. Stopping below the Space Needle on our way out. Photo op. I wonder if we did that a horizontal or vertical picture. After Seattle, we boarded the ferry boat which crossed Elliott Bay, which is more widely known as the Puget Sound, the big body of water that comes in to the bay by Seattle. This was the first of 3 car ferry trips we took across water, be it bay or lake. You can see how we pack in like sardines all the cars below, and up on top you had the opportunity of sitting in the middle area or going up on the deck. And as you'll see in just a minute, up on the deck we had those are the Olympic Mountains in the background. There we are up on the deck, and looking in the distance you can see the Seattle skyline, and not quite to the right visible, but over there to the right is Mount Rainier. Once we got to land, we drove maybe half hour to an hour and came to the town of Port Angeles, which, by the way, is the town where Grandpa Jim grew up. He was born in the outskirts of Port Angeles and grew up in the Port Angeles area. This was the 4th of July, and we saw fireworks show there, which did not begin until 10 o'clock at night due to the darkness getting dark at 10. The next day after the fireworks, July 4th, we got in our Eurovan and drove up the back side of Olympic National Park. The entrance to the north side comes up from Port Angeles, and Hurricane Ridge is the name of the area that is where the visitor center is. And here's our map where I do my usual flyover. Chung, 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 chung. Add those sound effects. So up at Hurricane Ridge, there's a visitor center, and you'll see in just a moment these beautiful views looking at the big backside of glaciers and mountains. Well, here's Nicole, and Nicole's going to talk a little bit about the planned trip that we have as we leave Hurricane Ridge and head over to Port Townsend and then another ferry ride.
Drive on this road, I think. Then all the way here. All the way here, then back, and then down to Port Townsend.
Outside of the visitor center, I locked the camera down and planned the family shot, which was going to be used at the end of the video, and this actually did become the last shot of our vacation video, the edited version. Isabella's overlooking the mountains of Olympic National Park, and on the other side would be the Pacific coast and the rainforest of Olympic National Park. Florence points out to a glacier that you can see in the distance.
And you can see it is cracked, actually. The lady said...
Riding down the hill, the girls followed me as I came down from Hurricane Ridge. I probably rode about 5 miles down that hill.
Go, Daddy!
Isabella and I went bowling in Port Angeles while Nicole and Florencia went to see Harry Potter. I had a pretty good day here. I don't think I recorded any of my strikes, but I did get a real high score. Here's my score, 211, and Isabella got an 83. Not bad on either count. The campground we spent the night at before we pulled out was on the upper side of the park, on the north side west of Port Angeles, and the name of this campground was Sol Duc Campground. July 6, 2007, we boarded our Eurovan at a town called Port Townsend, and we're going to ride the ferry boat over to Whidbey Island. While we were waiting for the ferry to arrive, the girls walked around the downtown area of Port Townsend. Here comes the ferry, right on time. Let's hurry back and don't miss that boat. Deception Pass is on Whidbey Island, and there's a big bridge there named the Deception Pass Bridge. We walked down this little trail to the bottom of the bridge and could look up and see this monstrous bridge. It's quite intimidating, so high up above the water. We walked out on it, and as I looked out, I got vertigo looking down and out, so I kind of held onto that ridge, held onto the railing. Here's Nicole pointing out to the Pacific Ocean. At the bottom of the bridge, here's where we took one of our family photographs later we used in one of our Christmas cards. Entering Canada, just on the north side of the northwest part of the United States, is Seattle leading into Vancouver. We stayed at, of all places, a trailer park just north of Vancouver. We're going to show you some video tomorrow of crossing over a bridge. Tonight, however, we hopped on the subway and we took the subway south of downtown in Vancouver and went to a baseball game. We took the subway to watch the Vancouver Canadians, which is a single-A farm team for the Oakland A's. Isabella and I kept score for a great deal of the game. Can't quite remember how it turns out. Here's Isabella talking a little bit about the game.
And then I also remember the baseball game where we came like 40 minutes late, but Vancouver won, but it was like really long because they came and tied and they kept going and going. It was 4 hours long, but we didn't stay the whole time.
The day after the baseball game, we loaded up the bikes and went across a bridge that connected the north side of Vancouver to the town of Vancouver. This here bridge is called the Lionsgate Bridge. We crossed that, and just on the south side of the bridge is Stanley Park. It's kind of like a Presidio in San Francisco. It runs around the perimeter of the peninsula, and it's loaded with bike trails, running trails. I believe there are a couple little lakes. There's a big pool on the south side. So it was probably about a 3 to 5 mile bike ride across the bridge over to downtown Vancouver, along the wharf, along the, I wanted to call it a wharf, kind of like, not like exactly like Fisherman's Wharf or Seattle Pikes Peak, quite modern. The girls had a good time on a hot day running through the sprinklers. On the south side of Stanley Park is a big swimming pool. It's called the Second Beach Pool. And Isabella is going to tell you a little bit about our day at the pool and the day at the park.
Oh yeah, the big swimming pool. That was so much fun because they had like 3 slides, but we only went on 2 because the other one was for little kids. And it was so much fun because it was really warm and it wasn't that deep at all. I mean, it was only one part that was really deep where I couldn't step, but I would go into water, but I could step it, but it wasn't that deep, but it was so much fun.
Next, we left Vancouver, got in our Eurovan, and drove along the Canadian-USA border. We were on the Canadian side and went on a highway which is called Highway 3, kind of the equivalent of a Highway 1 in California. We went through the towns of Hope, Princeton, and then stopped on a border town by a lake called Ociosus. While here, Florencia tries to say the name of the town and the lake we were at.
Estamos en el pueblo de Sosús. Don't do a close-up.
Let's have Nicole describe a little bit about the drive and these Canadian border towns.
We also, on our way through Canada, we passed by many towns like Nelson and Usus, and we camped there, and those towns were really nice. Like, we swam in the lake and went through the towns, and so it was nice to drive through Canada, which was a different country.
Our next stop was a little town called Greenwood, British Columbia. This town is remembered for two things. One was Isabella had to go see an orthodontist because her braces came loose. We called her orthodontist Rothstein in Mill Valley. He gave us the name of a local person in Greenwood, and this person helped us out free of charge. And also while we were in Greenwood, we went to the Visitor Center to get information, general information, and a person who was there suggested we drive north of Greenwood through a town called Nelson instead of going on the south side of Lake Kootenay, which we were going to originally do. So what did we do? We drove up about another 25 miles north and camped the night at Kootenay State Provincial Park. The next morning, Florencia did what she frequently does. She went for a long run. She went for this one on her own, but joined Isabella in the final stretch. On our way out of town, we stopped at this park. We're still in Greenwood, and Isabella had a good time chasing the birds. She says, "Dad, film me when I chase the birds." The next day we drove out of Nelson north to go across Lake Kootenay, and this was part of the charm and part of the suggestion that this stranger at the visitor center gave us. He said there's a free ferry that'll take you across Kootenay Lake. There it is, the Kootenay Ferry. It was no more than a 15 or 20 minute ride across this small lake, but why not? Free and beautiful.
Wow, mira, cambiamos.
Back south on the road, on our way, we crossed the border and went into the northern stretch of Idaho. Ooh, and while we were here, check the car. Started to overheat even worse. We were having to put water in about every 100 miles. We crossed in by Libby, Kalispell, which is just on the border between Idaho and Montana, heading over towards Glacier National Park. At this section, I decided to do my handheld shots out the window, held the camera down to the back, to the front, and look in the shot in this mirror shot, and you can see that I had my old mini digital DV camera. This is before iPhones, before GoPros, and before digital cameras that were with a digital card. Next stop, Glacier National Park, near the town of Libby, Montana. Glacier Park is the 8th national park, founded in 1910, with an elevation of 3,100 feet at Lake McDonald and 6,600 feet at Logan Pass. It's a big park with 1,500 square miles. Here we are at our campsite off Lake McDonald, about 50 yards from the water, and Florencia's making us hamburgers. Shortly after dinner, we took a walk down to the park, left the food unguarded, and we got a real stern note from the rangers that do not leave your food out. Ever. The next day we stopped at the visitor center, and here we got a good look at the relief map. The relief map of Waterton, which is on the north side of Glacier on the Canadian side. And we will go to Waterton, I want to say 10 years later.
I can't take it.
Here is Nicole giving us a recap on what's going on in and around Glacier National Park.
But it was really nice. I really liked, our campground was at a really nice setting, and I really liked Lake McDonald, which is the biggest lake in Glacier, I think. And it was one of the warmest waters that we have swam in. We took our little raft out and we swam in the water. And since there were no showers, we actually had to take a bath in the water. It was really fun. I really liked it, and I like going to Lake McDonald. And I also in Glacier we did some hikes, and of those we did 2 hikes. And my favorite one was the 4-mile one up to Avalanche Lake. And when we got there, it was really incredible. It was like this big bowl, and like the mountain was really high, or the mountain thing was really high. and it was really incredible. And I liked the hike because like we all just kind of talked on the way up there, and we had food and drank water, and it was just kind of an enjoyable thing. And we walked by like a river, so it was a nice hike.
The next day we got in our car and drove up to what is called Going to the Sun Road. It's a strange name. It sounds as though it's a description rather than a name. And at the top of the Going to the Sun Road is a visitor center. The pass, which is also on the Continental Divide, is called Logan Pass. Florencia suggested we'd go for a small hike. And anytime Florencia suggests a small hike, the girls and I go, uh-oh, small hike means big hike. In the visitor center, we did some reviewing of a small hike and discovered that there was a hike that's probably about a mile from the visitor center to a ridge overlooking a lake called Hidden Lake. So after Isabella stamped her passport, which I think this is the first year she had this passport. This was a gift to her from her grandmother. I think this is the first year that she used it. Going up this trail, which is loaded with ice and little mini glaciers and mountain goats.
Cuando lleguemos, Nicole.
It's hot now. We have to do it now.
How about those mountains in the background? Again, this is the top of the Going to the Sun Road, Logan Pass. Put the camera down, walked into frame, got myself recorded, turned around, came back to pick up the camera, and moving on. Okay, go. Brilliant, Isabella. It looks like an old Indian handprint. And there are some of the mountain goats we saw on our trip to the overlook of Hidden Lake. Plenty of the snow to have a snowball fight. And there's Hidden Lake. This is a popular hike by people that are not into big long hikes, because from the visitor center, I think I said it's about a mile, give or take that. And there's the peak at the ridge overlooking Hidden Lake. On our way down, we slid and slided and scooted.
Got it.
Some more of the mountain goats. Those look like rams, kind of like Los Angeles rams in the distance. Florencia convinced us to go for the perfect hike up the Avalanche Gorge, a 5-mile round trip hike to Avalanche Lake. And this turned out to be the perfect hike that you could do. It was 2.5 miles from the parking lot, climbed about 700 feet, and it was in the shade, and it reminded us a little bit of like hiking in Muir Woods. Once we got there, there was this beautiful view of Lake Avalanche Lake, and in the background is Bear Hat Mountain. And Bear Hat Mountain to the top rises 8,000 feet, where the lake itself is about 4,000 feet. So that's almost a 4,000 foot climb from the lake up to the top of those ridges. The elevation gain we had from the parking lot to this lake was about 700 feet. I don't know how many times we have to talk about this when we look back on this, as always saying one of the perfect hikes we've ever done. While there, Isabella and I cooled our feet down. It was warm, probably was in the upper 80s, 90s. On the way down, it was the perfect, easy 2.5 mile hike, going back down about 700 feet in elevation loss. This is the Glacier Park Lodge, and while we hung out here for the better part of a half hour, we saw one of the most interesting and memorable things we've ever seen at a lodge. Look over here. We saw this guy sitting at the writing table, and Isabella will point out, this guy's not moving. This guy we thought was either a statue or a man who was frozen or stuffed. He just did not even move. I swear to you, for the longest time we thought this was a statue of a guy sitting in the lodge reading. Back on Lake McDonald, Nicole is sunning on the Sevula raft and Florencia is paddling. I might point out that this raft was one of 2 we bought over the years. We bought the first one, this is probably the first one, and we spent not quite $100 on it. You got 2 oars, and we got a pump, And we use this thing all the time on our raft trips. We jam it either on top of the van or down low with the van, but that was always traveling with us all these years of road tripping. On the way out of Glacier Park, just south of the entrance, there was this fantastic log, water slide. And the girls went up to the top. You can, I think, see Isabella or Nicole coming down there. They're going to talk a little bit about this stay because this was always one of their favorite things to do, the water parks.
And in Montana, after Glacier, we stopped by at a water park called like Big Sky Water Park or something. And me and Bella went by ourselves. It was a really fun. There was so many slides there. And I went on every single one of them except for the one that I wasn't allowed to go to because it was only for 9 and under.
Oh, also in Montana, we also got to go to this so fun water park, and there's humongous slides.
After a stop at the water park, Florencia took time to work with Isabella and Nicole on their Spanish homework. Ahead of us was a long day driving down from Montana through the southern part of Montana, crossing into the state of Idaho, and going over State Highway 93. You can see the towns that we're going to go through, and Stanley is just before we get to Ketchum and Sun Valley. This is a colorful highway, and I'll point out some of the towns that we come along. And we did spend the night at a town called Sula. The day after spending the night at Sula, we drove on 93 going southbound, but actually going southbound on 93 took us up over the Bitterroot Mountains, over the town of Norfolk, Salmon, and now we were running parallel with the Salmon River as we crossed the Continental Divide and Chief Joseph Pass. Here we had a lot of interpretive signs that pointed out that this was one of the spots that Lewis and Clark crossed, and there was also many years later a battle with Chief Joseph against the U.S. military. We did not have a chance to go see that historic site. Continuing down 93, we went through the towns of Ellis, Chalice, and Stanley. And once you hit Stanley, you're just about to Sun Valley. And Sun Valley Ketchum was the next stop where we gathered with our Tamaulipan friends to spend a week at the Wild Horse Creek Ranch. I should point out again, as I did in a previous video or two, how we originated with this tradition of going to Idaho, Sun Valley every summer. Kind of predated our first trip, which was 2004. For years, Bruce Mays, NACO, and a few of his other fly fisherman friends would frequently go up to the Idaho area and spend time up there. After a few years of doing this on their own, they decided to invite the wives up, and that would have been 2004. Florencia and I scored an invitation and stayed with NACO and their friends at a condo in Ketchum. And the year after, 2005, that was the first year we decided to make it a big thing and invite more families, and found the ranch up in the outskirts of Sun Valley, about 20 miles northeast of downtown Sun Valley. And we'll show you those photos in just a minute. Traditionally also, we would get together in downtown Ketchum, and the families would eat a pizza, or we would go to a popular burrito shop called, the name of that burrito shop skips my mind, K's, Mr. K's. They're not there anymore, but we always went and got burritos, either before or after we had spent time up at the ranch. Here we are at a water park, just as the group is getting together. You can see Bruce, and there's Lavagis, and there's NACO. There's Florencia with little Ziggy NACO. There's Nicole spraying Isabella with the water pistol. And then coming there is the other Bella Lavagi, hitting Isabella Amyx with the water pistol. There's NACO in the background. That is Florencia. Julia hitting the other Lavagi. That's Julia Mace with the glasses. She's now 23, 24 I was tracking. She's working in Ketchum now with the Park and Recs department. That's little Ziggy. I think that was Marley or another friend of the NACO family in the water park. We are now up in the high mountains of outside of Sun Valley. Again, about 20 miles east, about 1,000-foot climb, Wild Horse Creek Ranch, which we rent from Lonnie and Dave. Is it Cowboy Dave? The main lodge, as you can see here, has a kitchen, a dining room, a game room, and it sleeps probably anywhere from a dozen to 20 people. There's the swimming pool on the outside. And in the distance, we are in the happy hour, a tradition that we would do every afternoon about 4 o'clock. People would bring their wine and their cheese and their crackers, and we would sit and socialize. Oh, that was a nice close of the door. Here you can see some of the peepers, Charlie and Miss Rickman, Scott and Becky with little Ori. Oh, there's Hannaford. Debbie Hannaford was there this year. There's Dave Hannaford, who they only went 1 year. Sherry Tracy with pointing her finger. And the Tracys were frequent goers to the ranch. Inside the game room, we can see Isabella playing ping pong with Sage Mace. In the background is Ginger Harn. And there's Julia, who I pointed out now, engaged to be married. She's 23. That is Kylie, who is now a dancer in college or out of college. Annika Labaji, Ava Harn. These girls are all either in college or out of college now. Ava's actually still in college in Oregon. There's Sage. Sydney just started his second year at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And there's Bella Labaji, who went to Stanford, and she's done at Stanford, and she's out in the working world now. Jenna went to Cal Poly. She's out working now as well. And the kids had a fun day of playing Twister. This is in the game room at the main lodge. Tom Tracy on the outskirts of the patio area. Again, we see Becky there with little Ori. And there's Becky's other daughter, Paige, and Ziggy in the background. There's Julia Sudlow, who got married a couple of years ago. Here we are lined up for dinner. The dinner bell rang every day, 5 or 6 o'clock, kind of on the early side. And they usually had a spread of salad and anywhere ranging from steak to burritos to fajita bowl to hamburgers. It was usually simple but yummy picnic-style stuff. And on this table, let's see who's there. There's Julia Sudlow, Nicole, the Tracy girl. There's Isabella with the pigtails, Annika, Carol, Little Leipzig. There's Florencia next to Sarah Sudlow with the glasses. Dave Sudlow, Becky and Sarah Leipzig, Ruth Ann, and there's Mitch on the end. And Mitch and Becky, since this time, they moved and they live now in Haley. There's Bruce with the fisherman's hat, Charlie M, his fisherman buddy, Scott, who now lives in Portland, David Leipzig with the hat, and there's Sonny and Randy, Rickman with the glasses, Nako, his 2 kids, Dave Pinto, Karen Mace, Sherry Tracy, Tom Tracy, and on the end is little Jody, Ginger, and the little Eisenberg girl, Mia. Horseshoes was one of the many games and activities that we played around the backyard. You can see the sunset there. That's Sonny Blendy. And who else is playing here? Tom Tracy and his wife, Sherry Tracy. So we played a lot of horseshoes. Bocce ball was a big game that we played. There was no archery, but we did have a shooting range where Dave Sudlow would bring some of his rifles, and we go out to a shooting area and do target practicing. Florencia organized a mini Olympics, kind of a little mini version of what we did in Mexico, where the kids would do relay races, the 3-legged races, and those were always fun and good for a good video. As I pointed out earlier, we played billiards inside the game room, and I would frequently do my Martin Scorsese color of money shots here, these close-ups of the ball going in, tunk, tunk, or the breaks. Board games, as I pointed out, with the girls playing Twisters, lots of hiking, and fly fishing, of course, was still done by the boys. They would oftentimes go out in the morning, disappear for a few hours, come back in time for breakfast or lunch. And here's Ruth Ann getting a personal class, a personal instruction from her husband Charlie, how to fly fish. This is Becky blowing our horn, starting the race. The first few years, this again is 2007, the first few years we actually had a race. Bruce arranged it that we would all run to the top and race down. There was a men's category, a women's category, and there's me, the slowpoke category of guys that were filming the finish. We would cross the river and do our hour hike up, and then we would come down one by one. Here's Florencia, Lonnie, and two of Lottie's nieces watching from the very bottom. This year I did not have a camera to carry down with me, so all the video I have from this year was filmed by other people at the bottom. Oh, that's our good friend Helen giving Sarah a back massage. So somewhere in the distance you can see little figures coming down. I couldn't for the life of me tell you who these people are. At the bottom we would cross the river, and boy did that feel good on the feet. That would have been Karen. That, in fact, is me. So someone's filming me there with the white gloves in the distance, hobbling down. At the very bottom, the rocks got really big. The softest and smoothest scree or soft rock was at the very top, and that's where it felt like you were jumping in the sand coming down. Oh, yes, I made it to the bottom. Who knows what my time was? Probably 2.5 hours, the full loop. Shaking all the dirt and rocks out of my shoes, and then we would hop the rest of the way back to camp, about a half mile back to camp from where we came out of the river. After about a week in Sun Valley at the ranch, we headed towards the coast. We drove through Boise, and while in Boise, our car broke down. We had to spend the night to have a water pump delivered and replaced. After a night in Boise, we drove up to Oregon along the Columbia River. And you can see the Columbia River here with the train on the north and south side. Our destination was going to be Hood River, the town of Hood River, off of the Hood River, which came from Mount Hood. And here we were going to meet with the Sudlows and have dinner at a restaurant. Eventually, our destination was going to be Lincoln City in the coast of Oregon, where the Sudlows have a second house, and we're going to spend a day with them. After we had our meal with the Sudlows, we drove up the Hood River District about maybe 20 miles towards Mount Hood, and we found a campground, and we camped there for the night. You can see Mount Hood in the background. The day after, on our way driving back, we stopped to stretch our feet and cool off our toes in the Hood River. We also went to a cherry farm. And at the cherry farm, you're able to walk out with a guy with a big stick or a chainsaw, and you say, oh, I want those cherries. And he'll grab his chainsaw, and he'll cut them down for you. He'll put them in a basket. You'll take the basket inside to the lady, and she will weigh them, and she will say, okay, you bought 2 pounds of cherries. It's going to be X amount of dollars. So it says you actually pick your own cherries, and you don't exactly pick them, but you watch the guy pick them, you choose them, and then pay for them. The day after we picked our cherries, we went east on the interstate, parallel with the Columbia River Gorge, along the Columbia River, and we went past Portland and reached the area of Astoria, where we crossed the Astoria-Meagler Bridge. This went over the Columbia River on the very far northwestern corner of the country. Here's a look at this massive bridge. It must be the better part of 3 miles long and takes probably at least 3, 4, 5 minutes to cross it. And this is the border of Oregon. On the south side, there's the Columbia River looking eastbound, and on the north side is the state of Washington. As we cross the bridge, you can see we enter Lewis and Clark National Park. Had nothing to do with Lewis and Clark. They didn't stay here. And you can see now we are on the Washington side of the Columbia River. Over here was a big, beautiful lighthouse, the Cape Disappointment Lighthouse, not quite a mile walk from the parking lot. And while we were here, we overlooked the Pacific Ocean, had some beautiful views, and also played with our shadows, creating shadows with the sun here against the lighthouse. about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours south of the Columbia River and the Astoria Bridge, we made it to Lincoln City. And here we are on the sand dunes, just a short walk from where Dave and Sarah Sudlow have a family house that at that point they shared with their brother. I think it's now just part of Dave's immediate family. And they go there a few times a year to relax, get away from Marin. And you can see Isabella here pointing to the sandcastles. Dave Pinto also, along with Jody, spent the night there. And we did spend one afternoon building sandcastles. And as the tide slowly came in, we did some jumps over the sandcastles. And after we all did our jump as far as we could, we watched the tide come in and destroy the castle. After spending the evening with the Sudlows in Lincoln City, we got in our camper and we headed south. Our destination today was going to be touring the coast of Oregon and getting down into Northern California, and we'll camp in Northern California near the Redwood State Park. But along the way, we saw lots of colorful sights. The highway along the coast of Oregon is a lot like the Highway 1 that is in California from Carmel to Morro Bay. Lots of beautiful scenic sights, lots of camping, no surfing, but there is a lot of ocean beauty and towns, sand dunes. There was one town called Florence we went through, named after Florencia, not really. And just south of Florence was the Oregon sand dunes. And we saw some really cool dune buggies here. As a matter of fact, a few years later in 2018, we went back to this area and went on a dune buggy ride. On the way down, we also stopped for a nice dinner at this throwback 50s restaurant. And finally, crossing into the state of California, we spent one night in Redwood State Park. On the way there are numerous moose you can see along the highway side of the road. This is Highway 101 on the north side, and this is a cute shot of Isabella looking over the top to see what she's missing from the bottom side of the camper.
Boom, boom, boom. Little bug dad.
We met Dave and Jody Pinto the next morning in the town of Samoa, which is just west of Eureka, for breakfast in the Samoa Cookhouse. This is a charming old diner with an Old West museum, and a long time ago in a different era, this was a mess hall for lumberjacks. In that same town, we passed by the Eagle Mark Club, also known as the Old Carson Mansion, which was built in 1885 and is now a private club. And one more stop as we're really heading down south back to Marin was the little town of Scotia. See this old railroad? This used to tow passengers to the top of Mount Tam. Since this day, where we are here, the Mill Valley Historical Society has purchased this locomotive, and one day in the future, this locomotive will be brought to some spot on Mount Tam for public view. And just south of Scotia, as we pass through the tunnel of the Redwoods, a 3-hour trip later, we arrive to Mill Valley, home, 514 Browning Court, Mill Valley, California. And of course, as we park the car, we staged this shot of the girls jumping and running out of the car, and they always would say with great joy, "Home at last, home at last."
Oh, yay! It's mine! It's mine!
And as I conclude to sign off, I want to point out where we are today, 2020. We did take a road trip this year, although our older daughter Nicole was in Leeds finishing grad school, and our younger daughter Isabella was playing soccer in Mexico. So it was just Florencia and we took a road trip this year to Colorado, Rocky Mountain National Park, Arches, Capitol Reef, Breckenridge, Frisco, and parts of Salt Lake City. So there, let's wrap it up for now. I want to point out also that this was inspired by Robbins Barstow, who I pointed out a few years ago was my inspiration for doing this director's cut. He was a fella who had a family of 3 from the Connecticut area in the 1950s, did a lot of road trips with their old 8mm camera, and later he narrated a behind the scenes, kind of what I did, so my inspiration goes to Robbins Barstow. And in final conclusion, you can see all the Amyx family road trips, if not all of them, many of them on YouTube. Google Amyx Video Road Trips and you will see some of the edited versions. Home at last.